Right, well, thank you again for joining us on our regular meeting of the Madera County Transportation Commission Policy Board.
Okay.
Okay, welcome again to our regular meeting of the Madera County Transportation Commission Policy Board. This meeting will also be via Zoom. There is a link and we have the password also on our website. With that, we'll go ahead and take all this to order and people.
Commissioner Zachariah?
Here.
Commissioner Ahmed?
Here.
Commissioner Poitras?
Yes.
Commissioner Wamhoff?
Here.
Commissioner Rogers?
Here.
Commissioner McCauley is absent from this meeting. We have a form.
All right. And aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Chair Rodriguez.
All right. You will all join me on the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll ask Commissioner Poitras to lead us on the pledge.
Very good. My honor. Would everybody join me as we salute our flag? Ready, salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Being said, we'll move on to public comment at this time. Made available for comment from the public on matters within the board's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. Attention is called to the fact that the board is prohibited by law from taking any substantive action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda, and no adverse conclusion should be drawn if the board does not respond to public comment at this time. It is requested that no comments be made during this period on items that are on the agenda. Members of the public may comment on any items that is on today's agenda when the item is called and should notify the chairperson of their desire to address the board when that agenda item is called. This time I'll ask if there's any member of the audience wishing to make a public comment. If none, then I'll go to our Zoom audio. Okay. Go ahead and close public comment. Move on to item 4, MCTC sitting as a Transportation Policy Committee. Transportation consent items. All items on the consent are considered routine and non-controversial by MCTC staff and will be approved by one motion if no member of the committee or public wishes to comment or ask questions. If comment or discussion is desired by anyone, the item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered in the listed sequence within opportunity for any member of the public to address the committee concerning the items before action is taken. Any of my members wishing to pull out any items?
Sure. I'd like to comment on item 4D.
4D. Okay, make a note of that. Any other consent items that need to be placed for a separate discussion? Okay, any member from the public? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back and approve items on the consent with the exception of 4D, or would you like to discuss 4D?
Yeah, I'd just like to mention, I have read the commission vision and I don't know who else has, but I'd just like to congratulate the staff for what I think is an excellent publication. And I think the only problem is we need to distribute it, try to get it out to more people. I think it's an excellent product. It talks about what we've been doing and what MCTC is all about. And, and it was a great article from our chair. Welcome. And so I just wanted to, again, recognize staff for an excellent publication, and it's keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Poitras. Any other comments? Move to approve. Okay, we do have a motion from Commissioner Rogers. I'm sorry, I want to call you Roger.
Yeah,
and a second from Commissioner Poitras. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. My apologies, Commissioner Rogers. No worries. Okay, moving on to item 5, transportation actions discussion items. Item 5A, Madera County Growth and Development Forecast. It's an action item, and you have this. Mr. Stone?
Yes, sir. This item 5A pertains to the Madera County Growth and Development Forecast. This is a project we began working on last summer. It utilizes $55,000 of our Senate Bill 1 MPO formula funding. That is funding that's made available for MPOs to help develop their regional planning, such as the Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. Anything that can support regional planning and programming from our agency. As you know, the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, is a long-range transportation plan. That's why it's really important for us to have the most accurate and credible information we can have on the projected conditions of the future. That includes land uses, where development happens. That includes road projects, the projects we invest in to accommodate for our growth. But a big part of that and understanding how we can analyze where we need to invest is analyzing or understanding where our population will grow and how much growth there will be and what size of growth that population will have in terms of its household composition, income, things of that nature. So we've worked with PlaceWorks to prepare this forecast for us. This is something that will, once approved, will immediately be applied to our technical analysis tools. Our travel demand model has an input where we can account for years in the future of where the things I just described happen. What type of households? How many people per household? What is the composition on a socioeconomic factor of those households? All things that are within our travel demand model that have very small impacts, but collectively do give us a better projection of how transportation behavior will act in the future as we projected for our plan. We have invited Steve Gunnels, who was the development lead from PlaceWorks, who led his team to develop this forecast with us. He has some slides that can take us through some of the information about what's in the forecast. And we can also answer any questions on the conclusion of those slides. Okay, Mr. Gunnels.
Good afternoon. We can go to the next slide. So just briefly, there are two things I wanted to talk about. The first set of is kind of the demographic context. It's things that are changing in society and the economy that are going to make growth and development going forward a little bit different from how we've experienced it in the last 30 years. And then the second half, just kind of what are those long range numbers for household growth, housing growth, job growth, that sort of thing, to give you a flavor of what's in the overall report. So really what we're looking at in the big picture is how many people are going to be living here, from now through 2050. What are the characteristics of those residents and the households that are living here? And then finally, how many and what types of jobs will the economy provide? And of course, that has a lot to do with the transportation planning and other planning that goes on in the county and the jurisdictions. So when we think about how many people, it's in one sense pretty easy. It's how many people get born, how many people die, and then that net migration. Some people are moving out, some people are moving in. And we just combine all of those in a fancy model to look at where these trends are going in the future. So the thing that's changed with births, and I don't know how clearly you can see this. I just got new glasses, so I can see it pretty good this year from over here. This blue line is the number of births in the U.S. going back to 1909. And that light green area, that's the baby boom, right after World War II. And the orange line is the fertility rate, the number of babies born to women aged 15 to 49 each year. And so you can see we went up for the baby boom, we came down for Gen X, that's my people. Then we went back up with the millennials, and then something happened in 2008. 2007 was the highest number of births, and since then it's been declining. Of course, there was the recession. I'm sure that was a big part of it. But there's been a fundamental change, and this we see going on throughout the world, the industrialized world, even the developing world. They had a similar issue, south of the border of Mexico, where their fertility rates have dropped off. And it's fewer and fewer kids per household. And so, the first 10 years, we were like, well, we're going down a little. And now we can really see this is a fundamental change. And it's going to affect Madera County, San Joaquin Valley, California, the U.S., everybody. And then there's migration. And this kind of complicated to look at, but this is California going back to 1990. And the orange line is domestic migration, people moving into or out of California to someplace else in the US. The green line is foreign migration, people coming to California from a foreign country, last however many left California to go to a foreign country. And the blue line is the natural increase, is the births and deaths. So you can see the natural increase has been slowly declining. Where but for a few years with the dot-com boom, if you're old enough to remember that, California has steadily been losing people to other states in the country. And it's the natural increase and the foreign in-migration that's made the growth in California. And even if that's not so directly here, well, some of it's here, but it's also where the people are moving from. The domestic migrants from California that are moving here are coming from areas that are also affected by that. And so the foreign migration has been steadily declining. We had that drop off with COVID, and that's when California had its first decline in population. The foreign migration has come back, but going forward, we're statewide in a low to no growth kind of framework going forward. Some of that's foreign migration, most of that's just that birth story. When we look at migration in Madera County, it's kind of hard to get a handle on it because of the state prison facility. So these are the top 10 counties where people came to Madera County and the top 10 they left for. I don't know that you have a lot of people voluntarily leaving here to San Bernardino. I think that's probably some prison population getting transferred to the south. But if you look at where the counties where people are coming from moving here, some of that may be prison, but some of that's just the fuel for building housing and new neighborhoods in Madera County. And so you can see some of that's within the San Joaquin Valley, but a lot of that's coming out of the Bay Area and Southern California. And so what happens in those areas will influence how many people are leaving those areas coming to Madera County. So that's the number of people. When we look at demographic characteristics, one of the things that drives that is just natural aging. You do a census and you have a additional family. You count them again 20 years later, but those kids have grown up and moved out. So you have a smaller household. And maybe those kids stayed local. Maybe they went away to university. Maybe they moved elsewhere. But we see that in the changing demographics. Some of that's just natural change. Another component of how that changes is if there's differences between who's moving here and the growth you've had locally in the past. And finally, there are societal changes. So it's that birth rate. You can go back to the baby boom generation, people waiting longer and longer and longer to get married, longer and longer and longer to have first kids, longer and longer and longer to buy the first house. And those changes, they have to end at some point if we're going to keep going. But those are going to affect the types of households and the size of households we're going to have over the next 25 years. So this is comparing the age for Madera County in California. And the blue is the county and the orange outline box is the state. Males on the left, females on the right. Under 5 years old is the bottom and 85 and above is the top. And so where we're a little bit different here is at the bottom of that pyramid. We have a larger share of our population that's children now. As we're going to see, that's going to change going forward, and that's part of that declining birth rate story. If we look at household type, on the left, we have married family with kids, then it's married family without kids. When I say kids, it's 18 or under. married family without children under the age of 18. The middle one is single parents with or without children, then living alone, and then all the other kinds of households. Madera County's green, and the one area where it sticks out is in the single parent families. A little bit more married couples with children, and fewer people living alone. So those are some kind of the key differences between California in orange and the US in blue. And then there's household size. So if you go back to 1970, the blue line is the average household size in the US. And that's been declining. A lot of that was just baby boom kids moving out. But even so, when you get into the 80s and 90s and 2000s, that still continues, although a little more slowly, a declining size of households. California is the orange line, and you can see it was kind of growing, slightly larger and larger households up until the recession or COVID. And it's been coming down. And most of the research expects that to be the continuing trend for the state. And that's primarily driven by, again, the birth rate. California Department of Finance is projecting the state's birth rate to continue to. And then there's jobs in the local economy. And there's one model of growth that says when you have a growing economy, you keep more of your existing residents from moving away, and you attract more migrants coming here for jobs. There's also the other side that says, well, if you're getting household growth, you're getting more jobs for grocery stores and everything that serves the household growth. But there's a lot of interplay in there between the two. But a couple of the bigger things that are going to change that going forward is the continuing shift to online retail and how the larger national retailers aren't really interested in opening new stores. They're trying to perfect their model of getting you to buy online and ship to you, or buy online and pick up at the store, or come in and look and then buy. And it's only in areas that are growing households where they have an interest in building new stores. But that shift is going to continue to affect the kinds of jobs and some of the non-residential development that occurs. There's a declining labor force participation rate. Back in the early 2000s, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said, hey, when the baby boom retires, we're going to have this problem. We have fewer and fewer workers. And then we had the recession, and not so baby boomers retired right away because they lost a bit of their nest egg and they worked longer. And then when we hit COVID, a lot of the older population didn't want to be at work anymore. And so we've had that drop off. And following the trends, it's going to be a declining labor force participation rate. So that's going to affect the kinds of jobs, more automation, and the jobs that can be automated. It also means that businesses that are expanding are going to need to expand where there's a labor force, where there's people they can hire. And then I've tried not to talk too much about the new administration and the changes. A lot of that is early days. We don't know where it's headed, but it appears clear that there will be some economic restructuring. We can't really say how that's going to pan out, but that really will affect also the economy statewide and what's going on here in the San Joaquin Valley. So that's kind of an overview of the big characteristics. And so to summarize some of the key forecasts, the central forecast is the household population. And that's where we're looking at those birth rates, death rates, migration rates, and projecting those forward through 2050. So the solid blue line is the number of households in the county going back to 1990. And you have pretty rapid, steady growth going up to the recession. And then it didn't quite flatten out, but it kind of looks like that. The growth and household population slow. And so as we carry the trends forward, the projection is going to be a kind of a mix between what you had in the 90s and 2000s and what we've had more recently. So whereas over the prior 25 years, it was about 1,600 new residents a year, going forward, on average, we're looking at about 950 new residents per year. That's still more than what you've had recently, but it's not that 30-year trend. It's going to be lower than looking at that whole 30-year period. And we see this through all of the forecasts that we have, where you did have a much stronger growth until the 2008 recession, and then things slowed subsequent to that. So we have households, and then we have the number of households, families that will be here. Again, if we look at the last 25 years, that's about 500 new households per year on average. And so that's picking up some of that pre-recession growth and what's happened since then. Going forward, we're still looking at about 490 households a year on average. And so we're going to get to the next slide. If the household population is growing slowly and the number of households is growing faster, what that means is a decline in the average household size. So it'll be a smaller number of people moving in, but about the same number of households. And over time, we'll see that average household size continue to decline. So if we look with the state data back to where you were in 1991, that was the lowest in the state records, which was 3.02 people per household. 1999 was 25 years ago. It had gotten up to 3.15, and 2012 was the highest, 3.3 persons per household. It's come down slightly through 2024, and the trend going forward would be a continued decline to where in 2050 we would be at 2.93, which is just under your lowest point back in 1991. This is still much higher than what we see in other areas in the state. And part of that is because you do have the trend of more children, either more children being born here and more new households moving here, bringing children with them. So the number of households is the same thing as the number of occupied housing units. We then look at the vacancy rate. And so the vacancy rate was going up. So the recession came down, and since about COVID, it's been kind of flat at the same rate. We kind of see that going back up over time to about 10%, which is that long-term average from 1990 through 2024. That might seem a little bit high. I think some of that is some of the seasonal housing you have in the mountains. And the other part of that is, I would say 10% is kind of up where you get when you have an active housing market. When you're growing the way Madeira's been growing. And there's just building new houses every year. There's going to be houses at any point in time, you count them, sitting on the market empty, just waiting for the buyers, waiting for people to move in. So it's not, I don't see that as a problematic rate. I just see it kind of indicative of a county where there is seasonal housing and pretty strong housing growth. Which then brings us to the number of housing units. And so here, if that vacancy rate story continues as we're showing, we would actually see more housing construction per year over the next 25 years than we saw in the prior 25 years. So again, continued strong housing growth, just fewer people in each of those houses. Then when we look at the number of jobs, We're looking at a little bit, well, less job growth per year than what you experienced over the last 25 years. And this really is kind of an outgrowth of that declining labor force participation rate and some assumptions about what might be happening with economic restructuring and how that shakes out. I think this is good for now. I think when you redo this in 4 years for your next RTP, we'll have a little more data on where the economy is going, and we can be a little more secure in where that's headed long term. Now, when we look at the age structure, it's the same chart as before, only now the blue is where you are today, and the orange boxes is the forecast for 2050. And so you can see you still have the same number of kids, but as you've grown, your population where you end up in 2050 is more older people. Now, this isn't as severe as what we see in other places, but you are looking long-term at that similar sort of trend you probably hear about in other areas of an aging population that will be coming home here, over the next 25 years. That was not as speedy as I thought I could be, but a speedy overview nonetheless.
Certainly very informative. Thank you. I certainly have a question, but I'll allow my colleagues here if they have any questions to ask away. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. I guess it was 2 months ago, month and a half ago, there's something, several of us attended a conference in Merced. It was our Valley Voice Policy Council thing. And there was a presentation, a similar presentation given, and except it was based on all the counties. And several of the counties actually showed a declining population. I think Kings County and several of the others, were going the other direction. If we were to, carry this chart out to 2060, 2070, would you see a similar trend here in Madera based on today's characteristics?
Yeah, I would, because right now your pyramid has that big bulge at the bottom with lots of kids. And so the first one I showed comparing you to the state was percentage, because we can't show that one was raw numbers. So you're still looking at about the same number of kids, but growing it older. And so that's going to then filter up, where right now you have a bulge. It'll be inward like that. So as you go forward from that, barring, again, societal changes where people go back to larger families, or whatever it might be, that might reverse. But yeah, I would say you're still benefiting in part kind of the growth coming from counties around you in a certain way that's carrying you forward now. But over time, those counties aren't going to have as many people to send here. The counties in Southern California and the Bay Area probably won't have as many people to send here. So it will filter down in that way, because migration is a big part of the growth here.
Right. Yeah, the birth rate's really a key factor. I think it wasn't too many decades ago, people saw things going the other direction, and, it was kind of like, oh, what are we going to do? And now people are panicking. Now the panic is, who's going to take care of us as we age?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
The robots.
Right, the robots. There you go. AI. Yeah.
Congratulations to the Madera High School robotics team.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Poitras. And to that, it's kind of indicative of what Commissioner Poitras said regarding who's going to take care of us. But looking at the age structure on that chart that you have up there, what's interesting is I watched this presentation on a demographer who's talking about the world, and more so with China, because they had that one child, right? But once the older population was set to retire, there was no one there to look after them. And that's what's kind of scary when you see certain graphs like this, is that our low fertility rate or low birth rate is certainly going to impact how we move forward, especially with the economic strength that we had at one time. Seems like we're at the decline. So I don't know if I should be happy or sad, but it seems like, looking at the forecast, it certainly relays some daunting numbers for us at some point, and some structures that have to take place for us to make up some of those economic revenues that we would be losing at some point. But I guess the question that I have for you is, looking at what you said with the household, if you have less birth rates, are we saying that it's going to be more single people owning a home versus having these big family structures? Meaning because there's more units, but yet less birth rates.
Qualitatively, I look at what you have in Madera County. And so I think part of what it is the growth, migration of families with children. And so I think I would say that you'll still have that, but it's not going to be families with 3 and 4 kids. It's going to be 1 and 2 kids. And then, yes, some growth in single individuals or just couples that aren't having children anytime soon.
It's interesting how the dynamics in society change when you have these certain environmental changes. I mean, I'm not saying all environmental, could be economic and what have you. And I know Madera, for one, maybe cost of living, for some folks with the median income here, probably don't meet it. So they transfer out, find different states, like you said. But nevertheless, thank you. Appreciate the information. It's great information. Any other questions?
One question, Chair. It's on the number of housing units. Where did you pull the data from for the estimated 580 housing units from now or for the next 25 years?
That's taking the forecast for the number of households, which is the number of occupied housing units,
So is this related to
plus the vacancy rate, and assuming that goes back up to kind of your long-term average, those units. So when you add those two together, that gives you the total number of housing units.
Is the data based on number of new housing permits that are issued? Like how is the data derived?
No, it's not. It's not based on the housing permits, and not as big of an issue here as in some of the other jurisdictions we've worked with fire loss in housing units, but sometimes those numbers kind of cloud that a little bit. But we did do just the number of permits to look at that trend. And if you look just at that trend, it would be slightly higher than the 580. But that isn't necessarily picking up a continuing decline in birth rate. It's, looking at what's happened in the last 25 years, and that declining birth rate really started nationally in 2008, and in California, and fell more quickly in California than it did nationally. So if we just do the building permits, we assume we're going to have a similar birth rate as what we had over the last 25 years. And so that if you look just at the building permits and say going forward, I guess it would be that way to you, going forward, it's going to look like that. But if we factor in the declining birth rate, it doesn't grow quite as fast.
And on the age structure, all I see there is that when I reach Social Security age, I'm not going to have it.
Yeah.
That's all I see.
Everything.
Yeah.
Goes like this.
You'll get to keep working.
That's right.
Yes, Commissioner Rogers.
Yeah, like any statistic, it's probably skewed by factors sometimes beyond sight. What is actually going to happen? These are just predictions, and assuming that you're assuming a straight line birth decline at a certain rate, and if certain things happen economically and certain things happen. There are some political changes in the wind that could affect that birth rate. There's a rise in conservatism among young people, heavy rise, such that that could definitely have a big impact on the birth rate. Conservatives tend to have more children. I don't know. That seems to be the case. Then also the same is true for the economic conditions in the county as far as the demand for housing and what have you, depending on what we do with subdivision development, what we do with job creation, economics, economic strengths, weaknesses, the agricultural industry, which right now is really getting hit very hard. 55% more failures in farms in California than last year. Bankruptcies. We were number one in the nation in bankruptcies in California for farms. That's not a good statistic. For a county that 80% of its revenue comes from farm. So that's a real negative. And was that factored into some of these thoughts?
On the birth rate, we utilize the state's projection going forward. And so their projection is that birth rate in California will, and in the report, there's a chart of it, will continue to decline through 2030 or 2035, maybe 2030 and then plateau, and come back up a little bit, not up to where we are today, but we'll come back up. So it's not, as I said, at some point, that'll stop declining. But realistically, yeah, it'll stop declining at some point. And so it's a bit speculative. So we just went with what the state has projected there. I will say that the employment projections, I've tend to be a little bit conservative in my forecast. I don't want to overpromise the good stuff like jobs and investment. So I hope I'm wrong there. But part of it is that understanding of what's happening in the agricultural industry, what may be happening with how that needs to change with the new immigration scheme that we may have in this country. And then also assuming that the tariff impacts take us to where most of the voices say we want to go, which is doing more manufacturing at home and importing less. So that means kind of a shift away from the logistics jobs statewide. But if there is that investment in new manufacturing capacity, this is the kind of, rural place with the late, I shouldn't say rural, I mean, you have rural land available. And you have a labor force. So I would think you would be well positioned to be competitive in that market going forward.
That's one of our strengths is manufacturing. We do have a good manufacturing base. We have a low vacancy rate in manufacturing properties. So yeah, I would agree with that.
And then the manufacturing is a tough one. You go back to 1977, 78. That's when we had the most manufacturing employees in the U.S. And it's steadily been declining, but the value of what we produce has steadily been increasing.
Right.
So we do more with fewer workers. So even though, there's one number for the workers, that doesn't mean that the factory space, the machinery isn't growing faster than the employment in manufacturing.
One thing to consider, like you said, automation. I mean, who's to say that these manufacturers aren't going to use all the robots that Madera's going to be producing pretty soon, right? So, I mean, that obviously is a decline in jobs. Even though we're high in manufacturing, doesn't necessarily mean that you're producing jobs. So, very interesting, though, by the way. Thank you. And I hope that those numbers may change in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something more promising. But if there's any other comments, questions for my... All right. Yes.
So, and this is maybe a question for staff, as far as this data, we're going to be using this for what types of modeling and what are the implications for, based on this data for trends and modeling and and for our county, PMT, et cetera, et cetera.
So for our first use, it's going to be right for the RTP, SCS, and the modeling tool that we use for that, our travel demand model. It has an input structured around almost everything that's developed in this report. So it's very tailor-made for it. There's some transitions or some conversions we do with some of the data to make it fit correctly. But we've been working with them as the report was being developed so that they can help us seamlessly transfer the quantitative data that he's produced in this, so we can use that as a control within our model for that planning process. Controls, population being one of them, state policies or laws can be another one, certain regulations or guidelines we have to follow to develop that plan. Those are all various types of constraints for the development of that plan. But it's important to have, the credible information like what's developed in this report that we can rely on for the projection side of how that model will work. So we do this with every RTP. For example, in 2014, we developed the same projections on population for that RTP. Very different California in 2014, only 13 years ago. The state's projection around 2013, I believe, is when we establish our planning inputs we're going to use for the plan. I think in 2050, it was said Madera County would have about 313,000 people in it. And now we're looking at a plan today where we're saying about 280,000 people. So there has been a wild shift on that assumption for population that we use for our planning. And that creates a really unstable foundation upon which you do your planning when things change that much every 4 years. Steve alluded to this. This is something that we'll be looking at again in 4 years from now. So a lot of the questions you guys have might have different answers in 4 years. Just depending on what happens, and to see how fast things have changed just since 2012. There's potential for that change to go the other way if things, do change on some of the other factors that have been discussed. But the way it impacts what we do, I didn't want to get too deep into that because you probably heard at that presentation, there's a lot of ways a lower population projection impacts transportation planning. In light of the state's goals, especially. The state has many goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions per capita and vehicle miles traveled per capita. Now, when you have a much smaller amount of growth happening in your region, that's much less potential for new strategies to have impact and to have the beneficial impact that you want to see to achieve those goals. If you're planning in Madera County that's got 313,000 people in 2050, all of a sudden you have all these other solutions and strategies to choose from that are more viable. You have more people in your urban areas, but with such a small growth total, it really limits what those strategies are going to be towards that aspect of the SCS and RTP in particular. That's one of the biggest impacts the population projection has for us in the planning world. And that's why it's important that we do studies like this to have a more focused look on Madera County. We did do, we're part of a projection with some of our other partner regions in 2012. In fact, Steve worked on that with us too. In the interim, we've used the state's projections integrated into this process, getting into our model, but they change a lot. We've been shrinking. In fact, I think when we started this study last summer, we were looking at the projection, and I think it hit about a point in 2046 where Madera's population did start to go down. And that was the peak essentially. So doing this study lets us look closer, lets us get a more fine-tuned approach to the Madera region itself. We did interviews with your agency staffs about any constraints or development opportunities there. I believe the results of this are about a 7% higher forecast than what the state had forecast for us currently, if we were to rely on that population assumption for the RTP. So I think this does take into account better what today we think the growth projection will look like, all things considered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Any other questions, comments? All right, great presentation again. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Dylan. I'll open this up to the public for any comments or questions. Seeing none in the audience, any? Okay. Close that public comment, bring this back. This is a action item to approve the Madera County Growth and Development Forecast.
Move for approval.
We have a motion from Commissioner Poitras. Second from Commissioner Rogers. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Moving on to item 5B, State Legislative Outlook, Governor's Fiscal Year 25-26 State Budget, May Revise, and Legislative Bill Matrix.
Yes, included in your package is a copy of a memorandum from Gus Corey, who's joining us today as well. He is providing you an update on the May revise and how it impacts transportation related to any kind of deficits or changes into the programs that are included into the budget. So this will be the May revise update, and then also included in your package is a bill matrix. And the bill matrix usually starts off with a large list of bills at the beginning of the year, February, when we share this with you. And then as we move along the process, it kind of some kick off, some become 2-year bills, some move forward. And so Gus will share with us where we are today on that, along with 2 support positions on 2 bills. So Gus?
Thank you, Director Taylor. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Gus Corey, State Legislative Advocate. Pleasure to be with you. As you would expect, it's high season in Sacramento. There's a lot to unpack. I hope that my report is just as informative and well presented as the previous one. That was really enjoyable to listen to, and definitely helps provide me with a lot of context and advocating on your behalf. So Governor Newsom a week ago, last Wednesday, had published his May revision to the fiscal year 25-26 state budget. And unlike the January submission, he's now citing that there's about a $12 billion shortfall. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that capital gains revenue is down by $10 billion. Personal income tax is down by about $1.5 billion, and even wages are down by about $2 billion due to a slight uptick in unemployment. For better or worse, this is a chronic problem for the legislature. We literally play the stock market on trying to balance the general fund. So we're heavily dependent upon corporate taxes, personal income taxes, and on capital gains. The good news is that from January through April, the state controller published a report that said that revenues were actually up $5.6 billion more than originally forecasted. So that's offsetting some potential cuts. And we'll see how the stock market responds. I know there's been a lot of talk about tariffs and what happens with respect to Wall Street and such. And so we'll see. But so the general fund, it's reduced from about $228.5 billion to about $226 billion. And that's because the legislature took about $2.5 billion to address the LA fires, earlier this year. And so with respect to, and we have a $15.7 billion rainy day fund reserve that runs through the end of the fiscal year. So they've got some resources to manage, but for all intents and purposes in the transportation arena, the governor is doing 2 things that are of high interest. And so first, he's proposing to have a line item for the high-speed rail project currently under the cap and trade program. There are various continuous appropriations. So high-speed rail gets 25%, the transit and intercity rail capital program, which allows for expanding rail services, buying rolling stock, erecting new stations and such. We've been successful in the Valley as far as getting a lot of money from that program. That's 10%. The low carbon transit operations program, that's 5%. And then there's an affordable housing and sustainable communities program. That's 20%. So in the aggregate, there's 60%. And then there's different line items for water and for CAL FIRE, for fire prevention. And so the governor's wanting to convert this over to a fixed line item. And so the blessing and curse is that it does provide predictability if they're going to get $1 billion. And he's proposing to extend the cap and trade program by 15 years. It sunsets in 2030, so to go out to 2045. So that's $15 billion in guaranteed funding for the project. However, revenues are projected to be higher going forward. This is according to those in the legislature. They forecast that there will be a substantially positive response to the extension of the program. And so that might result in higher revenues. And so it's almost like high speed rail is putting a ceiling. Conversely, if revenues aren't, if they were to dip, then that does shrink the pie for the continuous appropriations, among other things. And so that could impact our ability to get money through either the transit capital or the transit operations program to maintain, if not expand, service within the county and the region. So, and then secondly, what the governor's proposing to do is he wants the general fund is currently responsible for $1.5 billion to go towards CAL FIRE to ramp up activities to try to stave off the mega fires that the state has been experiencing. And so they've been using the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund as sort of this auxiliary general fund for the better part of the last 2 years. This was a big component of how they reached their budget deal last year. Well, the concern is now this eviscerates funding that remains from other previous general fund obligations, including the Senate Bill 125 funds. And we had learned this after the May revision was published. There was just a summary. The detail wasn't published until later. So this was not something that was published or even verbalized by the administration. We've now learned since that there's over $1 billion worth of transit funding that's at risk. And that includes the Senate Bill 1, the Senate Bill 1 competitive funds, which is almost about 200 million. And then there's 900 million from the SB 125 funds. And my understanding is, MCTC received about 8 million for the first 2 years of the 5-year program, about 8.5 million, and we're still due about $10 million to be allocated towards us. And so if we were to lose that money, that's the equivalent of losing about 45% of the revenue that you generate on an annual basis for 1 year's worth of Measure T. So it's a major concern. And, in previous years, I know, Supervisor Poitras was incredibly active when he was chair in talking before the Strategic Growth Council and others. And the state keeps putting additional impositions upon the MPO/RTPAs on, an even carb on getting your SCSs adopted. And yet, I don't know how we do that if the funding's not even reliable, where you can't propose certain projects that you can't deliver. And so if we can't get our SCSs adopted because the funding doesn't exist, then that prohibits our ability to acquire additional state funding, and it possibly compromises federal funding in order for us to make headway on improving our infrastructure, safety, mode shift, air quality goals, et cetera, et cetera. And so, so to that extent, what I've done is I've crafted a letter for the body's consideration. I sent it to MCTC staff a few hours ago. Just so let me back up. Timeline wise, so a couple things. The legislature has to send a budget to the governor by June 15th. The budget committees, however, are currently convening. They've just had informational hearings because, again, the May revise just got published. So they're informational. They're taking public input. But they have about a week and change until they have to submit a report to the floor. And then the legislature, both houses have to deliberate, send a bill to the governor. He has to have the budget signed by June 30th so that it goes into effect on July 1st. There are always budget trailer bills, meaning there's unfinished business that they handle after the summer recess. And so like from the middle of August to the middle of September, they'll have time to kind of deliberate on these things. But the plan was to bifurcate the cap and trade conversation from the state budget. So there's already consternation from legislators about what are we doing with calling dibs on the way that we're handling some of the greenhouse gas reduction funds when that's going to heavily impact the remaining conversation on what we do with extending the program to begin with. So I've encapsulated this in the letter that I've crafted. It's my hope is that we can ask, along with the Policy Council, other regions such as the Central Coast, properties in the Bay Area, among anyone else that wants to hop on, is to say, please honor the previous commitments made for public transportation. Even though these are one-time funds, we need them in order to maintain existing service and to have our SCS compliance, among other things. And then secondly, we need to build the state rail system and protect the high-speed rail investments, get Merced to Bakersfield completed. And then we could talk about how we link the rest of the state, because high-speed rail doesn't really have a plan beyond getting past Bakersfield to connect to Southern California. It's going to take additional resources, even if they want to do a dog leg out to Palmdale. And then we're asking for funding for the farmer program. That's on behalf of the Air Pollution Control District. And that's consistent with at least the Policy Council's adopted state legislative program. And finally, it's augmenting the existing pots that I mentioned for transit capital and for transit operations, especially since the state transit assistance program, which is really the bread and butter, and really it's the main source of funding for transit operations. It's flexible for capital and ops. That's been declining because of there is lower, it's based on sales tax on diesel, and there's less diesel consumption. And that's by design, as we're kind of converting over to alternative technologies and cleaner fuels. And so there's a lot going on, with respect to the budget and cap and trade. I'll stop right there, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions or comments. And then after that, I'll just briefly talk about the two bills that we're asking for your consideration of an action on.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. At this time, I'll see if any of my colleagues have any questions for Mr. Corey.
Gus, I just have a question in regards to the $1 billion set aside for high-speed rail. Just from listening as far as the cost with high-speed rail and so forth, it seems like $1 billion a year isn't going to go very far, or really isn't going to move the needle very much, because it, the cost keeps growing. I think over the last couple of months, it's grown by $3 billion as far as estimates. And so it seems like it's kind of window dressing. It really doesn't, it's not a significant source of funding.
So through the chair, the figure that's actually out there is there's at least a $7 billion deficit to complete the Merced to Bakersfield segment. That number can grow to 10 billion if we don't get the federal funding, which we think is going to wind up happening. But if they extend the cap and trade program for 15 years, they would theoretically have $15 billion, and that would account for any other possible cost increases, which seems to be a theme with the project. Now, annually, with just the 25% appropriation that they have been receiving, they've been getting roughly 910 million or so. So it's not that much more of an ask. Plus, what they're talking about doing is potentially bonding against that revenue source. So they should have adequate revenues. The LAO yesterday testified too that they can, probably get that funded, but anything beyond that is highly ambitious.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to make a comment or have any questions for Mr. Corey? I guess we'll let you proceed with the
Great.
other two bills that we have on the
Thank
agenda.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just two bills for your consideration. One is Assembly Bill 314, authored by Assemblymember Arambula, representing Fresno. And so what he's trying to do is provide a CEQA exemption for high-speed rail stops and just make sure that it counts towards greenhouse gas emission reduction. Felt like this would help our efforts to bring the Madero Station on board. And this bill is in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. So we're asking for support on this one. Secondly, Senate Bill 545, authored by Senator Dave Cortese, who's chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. He's from Santa Clara County. What this bill would do is require that there be an economic development analysis. So it's not just solely looking at the high-speed rail project with respect to passengers and such, but it's what impact does it have as a multiplier for economic activity throughout the corridor, right? In the valley and otherwise. And, he feels that this might help compel prospective future private investment. And that's sort of been the third leg of the stool with high-speed rail, by the way. So I'll tell you that when I was a committee consultant on the Assembly Transportation Committee back in 2002, and there were two efforts to delay putting the measure on the ballot. It finally succeeded in '08, but it was pegged then as a $30 billion project, 10 billion state, 10 billion federal, 10 billion private sector. Well, the 10 billion federal hasn't quite materialized. I mean, we have Prop 1A for the state share, but the private sector share has definitely not materialized yet. And the cost of that project is now escalated well over 9 figures for a full build out. And so what Senator Cortese wants to do is just be able to have something that's, where there's math and actual analysis supporting adding more tangibility to the value proposition of the project. And so, asking for a support position there. I have testified on behalf of the Policy Council. This was something that we had supported in that with that group. So just figured because Madera has a station at risk, it would be good to get on the record. Process wise, just so you know, the both committees are meeting this Friday, and they go through what Director Taylor was mentioning when we talk about the winnowing of bills. This is the meat grinder. It's the Appropriations Committee. So more than 90% of all bills that are introduced, and there were 2,504 of them this year, more than 90% go through appropriations if they have any kind of a fiscal impact. And that's not just they're asking for money, but if there's any kind of imposition upon a state agency to expend on staff time to meet the requirements of the legislation and such. So they're going to decide on Friday what bills progress. And so they usually cut quite a few. And with the state deficit, they tend to scrutinize more. So we'll see what winds up happening. But, with the AB 314, at least we feel that high-speed rail has been a priority for at least the governor, if not, some of the legislators who are questioning, the commitments. So we'll definitely keep you posted. But if the bills progress, it would be great to get on the record on both of those.
You, Mr. Corey, does anyone have any comments or questions regarding these two bills?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Gus. On SB 545, what is is there an estimated cost? I was just looking it up right now. I just don't see what the estimated cost is for, as far as implementation of this study.
Yeah, so the fiscal impact, and this is, so the governor, the bill is requiring the governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation to perform the study. And so they estimate, that office, that it'll be $474,000 in fiscal year 26-27. So this is budget year +1. And then $209,000 in fiscal year 27-28, including 250 one-time contracts and 1 personnel year from the general fund.
Very good. Thank you. And I was just going to make a comment. I think there's a good reason why private investment has not occurred. It's, what's different about government and private enterprise is that typically private enterprise they don't have the investment strategy to invest in something that is not proven to provide a return. And I think that I would be probably I just can't even imagine one company wishing to invest in a high-speed rail system with what's been happening and how it's been going. I mean, to me, it'll be an interesting study, but I can't imagine one company wanting to, you know, because of whatever the outcome of the study is, wanting to put in one dime into this particular project without some kind of a guarantee. And with a guarantee, anybody would want to put money in because again, that private industry is so to me, it always goes back to it's on the back of the taxpayer in regards to this. I mean, I read these things and I'm just going, what are these people thinking? Private industry is not going to put a dime into it and without a guarantee, and a guarantee is just like putting taxpayer money at risk again. Anyway, that was just a statement. You answered the question, I've made a statement, and so, but other than that, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. And, you know, to Rob's point, it looks like after the rail is completed, that's when the private investment comes in, right?
Right. With a guarantee, with a guarantee that the government will back up any losses they have.
Yeah, the other on the Anambla bill, I did like the fact that if we can get that exemption for any CEQA, especially when it comes to the high-speed rail, I think that would move along. And again, those $1 billion would probably stretch a lot more than they're currently today. So that being said, we do have an action item again that is to support AB 314 and SB 545. I'll open this up for public, see if there's any comments. Seeing none, bring it back to this board.
Take those separately.
Well, they're one item, 5B, but you certainly can. I mean, I think the whole purpose here was to get both of these supported, but you want to take those one at a time? If anyone wants to make a motion, we'll go from that. If not, then.
I mean, I'll make a motion for 5B to approve 5B as stated.
Okay, and 5B, okay, I'll have a second. We have a second motion from Commissioner Poitras, second from Commissioner Sakurai. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carried. All right, moving on to item 5C, award contract, lobbying and intergovernmental services.
Yes, this item is for Gus Corey, Corey Consulting. He is on a 3-year contract. 3-year contract expires in June. Basically, you know, Gus provides us with lobbying services and advocates on our behalf, goes through a lot of bills, writes letters, will meet with individuals that we request in Sacramento if need be, set up our not Valley Voice, but our Madera Voice trips. Basically, really, though, an extension of staff. He is always available every time I pick up the phone and want to call him, or he responds to a text or an email. He's always there, right there to respond. Very knowledgeable on what's happening in Sacramento. Going over all bills and are kind of complicated, and the processes, unless you're there walking the halls, you know, things move frequently, quickly. And so we rely on him for direction, leadership, support, and sometimes some of the information, for instance, this morning I had an item that came across my desk related to a bill that needs to be commented on by June 11th, and the mumble jumble in it, I just didn't quite understand it all to decipher through it, and picked up the phone and asked him, and he knew what it was and where it stood and how it would impact us. So it's been very, very useful to staff. He has been. The item before you today is to authorize another 3-year contract with 2 1-year option extensions. It would be in the amount not to exceed 75.9 for year 1, with an annual increase of 5% for year 2 and year 3. And so this is before you for approval or for any kind of questions that you might have of me. I don't know if he's still on. Yeah, he's still on if you needed additional questions for Gus.
Mr. Chair, I have a comment.
Yes.
I'd just like to say that, you know, in my dealings with Gus, I've always appreciated his ability to prepare us for our advocacy trips. I know the latest one, that was our Madeira trip. I was very impressed by the people that he was able to get us in front of and to advocate, for instance, the CALSA secretary, as well as others, and as well as our, well, this is part of the policy council, but also his preparation and ability to kick out talking points, and there, it's preparation that I have not seen in others. So I, again, just like to say that I've appreciated his work and partnership, and I would certainly be supportive of renewing the contract.
Thank you.
Chair, I just have a
Yes.
question. With the amount not to exceed 75.9, so is it on a like an hourly basis when you need the services, or is it flat?
Flat.
So why are we doing it not to exceed, or just the language?
Most of our contracts say that, so you just don't go over. So if there's an issue with any kind of additional hours or that he's putting, there isn't that ability to do so, but any kind of over and above work that we might ask him to do, it wouldn't be a part of this contract. It would have to be included into another contract that would go before you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I too would like to echo the same sentiments that Commissioner Poitras had said. I've had an opportunity to work alongside Mr. Corey. The latest edition of Mitch also, but he's certainly put us in front of our legislative representatives at the state, and also has always kept us informed, updated with all the latest bills and what's really coming down the pike with respects to funding for transportation. So I'm very appreciative of all the services that he's provided. That being said, that's all I have. This is an award and a contract. So do we have any other questions, comments? If not, then I can open this up for public comment.
No, no, no.
Okay, so I'll bring this back. Entertain a motion. Okay,
I'll second.
we have a motion from Commissioner Rogers, a second from Commissioner Poitras. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Moving on to item 5D, Social Service Transportation Advisory Councils, fiscal year 25-26 unmet candidate needs recommendations. This is Natalia who's taking on this.
Also, before I begin the presentation, I'd like to give an opportunity for our Social Services Transportation Advisory Council Chair, Frank Simonis, to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to you again. It's my fourth opportunity to do this as chair for 4 years. And the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, I'm able to say for the first time, has no unmet transit needs for the county or either cities to bring before you, which doesn't mean we don't have things that we're not doing, but that's a nice thing to be able to say that we, working with the Transportation Council, has done such a wonderful job. I also want to add that it has been a pleasure to work with Natalia as she has come over here to us from Merced County. She has been a pleasure for me to work with. She's the third person for myself. I worked with Nick Drybus prior to that, and he left the county to go to Notre Dame to pursue his master's degree. And with Evelyn, who I believe is still with us before that. And so thank you, Natalia, for all the hard work you've done and for your presentation you're about to do, because I've already reviewed it. It's fantastic. I don't have much else to add because what I would say is already in the presentation. So Natalia, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
During my speech. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Today, I want to share with you where we are in the unmet transit needs process. I know we've been talking about it for the past few months. I want to touch on the roles of the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council and MCTC, and also the efforts that we had that the efforts that were made to include the public in this process. I also want to discuss the analysis and recommendations that were made by the SSTAC, and finally, what the next steps in the unmet transit needs process are. Okay, so you can see the timeline there. In February, we officially kicked off that unmet transit needs process. And then in March and April is when we had 5 public workshops. In April, we also held the required annual public hearing. And in February and April, that's when the SSTAC, they met with the transit agencies to get updates on their transit systems. And they also analyzed all the comments to make the recommendations that they're making today. And so now with the arrows, as you can see, we all know we're here in May. And this is where this board will make the final determination on unmet transit needs for fiscal year 2025-2026. And then finally, in the upcoming months, we will complete the final report and then send all of that documentation over to the state. So as we talked about at last month's meeting, the unmet transit needs process originates with the Transportation Development Act. And that is something that helps fund public transit, and it also encourages coordination on regional transit issues. MCTC's role is to manage those funds and also make sure that the unmet transit needs process happens each year. And so part of that includes working with the SSTAC. It's a council made up of transit riders, older adults, people with disabilities, and social service providers, and all of them review public feedback. So their job is to help decide if a request is truly an unmet transit need and if it's reasonable to meet. And so each year they bring their recommendations to the policy board. Public participation is a big part of the unmet transit needs process. And while only one public hearing is required by law, we go well beyond that. So starting last fall, we had booths at various community events like the Madera Fair, the Oakhurst Fall Festival, booths in the park, and a few more. We wanted to meet people where they are. And so also in March and April, we had 5 workshops. 4 were in person in Lavinia, Madera Ranchos, Fairmead, and Oakhurst. And then we also had 1 virtual to help folks learn about the process and also to submit comments. We also posted flyers at more than 65 locations around the county. We sent out 85 letters to interested groups. We shared info through 21 social media posts. We posted flyers on the buses. We had information in our newsletter, the Commission Vision, and we also had information about the public hearing in the Madera Tribune. To make sure everyone could take part, we also offered Spanish interpretation at most of the workshops and also at the public hearing. And all materials were shared in both English and Spanish. So since April of last year, we received 24 public comments. And then on April 29th is when the SSTAC reviewed all of them using the definitions of unmet transit need and reasonable to meet that were adopted by the policy board. So if you want to go over those full definitions, they start on page 68 of the staff report. So I want to share a little bit about, oops, there we go, how the review process works. So first the SSTAC looks at each comment and look at whether or not it's described as an unmet transit need. If it doesn't meet that definition, then they don't go any further with it, then it's stopped. If it did, then they look at whether or not that request meets the minimum criteria to be considered reasonable to meet as defined by the MCTC policy board. So when deciding if something is reasonable to meet, the SSTAC looks at several things. So for feasibility, they're looking at, does it make sense? Is it legal? Would enough people actually use this? Community acceptance. Would people and community leaders support the service? For benefit to the population, would it help the general public, especially those who rely on transit like older adults or persons with disabilities? For cost effectiveness, it's pretty self-explanatory, but there's They also have to make sure that the service can meet the fare box recovery rate. And that is the amount of the operating costs that is covered by fares. So our local transit agencies have to meet a minimum of 10% to stay eligible for funding under the Transportation Development Act. So for consistency with existing plans, they're considering, does the proposed service align with major planning documents like our regional transportation plan or the short range transit plan? So if a comment is considered an unmet transit need, but then not reasonable to meet, that means it didn't meet one or more of the criteria that's listed there. And so in the agenda packet, we did add the SSTAC's recommendations for each comment for your review. Okay, before moving forward with this year's recommendations, we also wanted to provide an update about what came out of last year's unmet transit needs process. So for Madera County, there were comments that identified the need for more lighting at bus stops and to provide schedules with lighting so that riders can see if the bus is running on time, particularly in Lavinia. This board approved the SSTAC's recommendation that these are unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet. So since then, the county's been making progress. They've been putting up solar lights at bus stops. They've been adding schedules either on the shelters or mounted on poles. You can now see these updates in places like Lavinia, Oakhurst, the Pines Resort, and Easton Arcola. Plus, new bus shelters with lighting have gone up in Oakhurst and also at the corners of Avenue 12 and Road 36. Okay, so now moving forward to this year. After considering all of the comments, the SSTAC recommends for fiscal year 2025-2026 that there are no unmet transit needs for all three jurisdictions. So let's just dig into why the SSTAC made this recommendation. Okay, so here's a quick table showing the feedback that we got about Madera County's transit system, Madera County Connection. Most topics only had one or two comments, but the issue of how often the bus runs between Lavinia and Madera does stand out with 10 comments. So let's take a few minutes to quickly go over why the SSTAC made the recommendations that they did for each of these comments. So provide transportation to UC Merced and Merced College. So this route doesn't exist yet, but it would be 70 miles round trip. It would cost about $200 per trip to operate. To meet the 10% fare box recovery rate, we need at least 13 riders per run twice a day. There was a route in the past that was very similar, and that was cut due to low ridership. However, MCC is open to revisiting that because times may have changed. You know, Gen Z riders don't get their licenses as early as we did when we were ready to get our license at 16 years old. So they're interested in partnering with UC Merced to study the demand and explore funding options for that. Increase the frequency on the Valley Children's route. So this route is about 40 miles round trip. It costs about $132 per trip to run. To break even under the 10% fare box requirement, we need about 9 riders per trip. But last year, it only averaged about 3. So right now, with that current level of ridership, it doesn't show that it's an unmet transit need. But MCC is looking into microtransit as a more flexible and a cost-effective option to accommodate future demand because there is a new development, the Hill, that is planned near the hospital that could increase demand, especially for hospital staff commuting from Madera. So MCC will keep monitoring the ridership and adjust service as needed. Okay, so increase the frequency to the community of Lavinia. So this route currently is about 22 miles round trip, costs about $106 to run per trip. To meet the 10% fare box recovery goal, you need about 7 riders per trip. but last year it averaged only 1.7. So given that, hitting the target is not quite likely right now. However, the flip side of that, there were some comments made that the ridership isn't there because people are afraid that they will be stranded in Madera and not be able to make it back home to Lavinia with the way the current frequency is. And so MCC has agreed to further survey the current riders of this route to better understand their needs and to make sure that any changes make sense for all the riders of that route. Provide service from Oakhurst to get to Madera Superior Court by 8 a.m. So just want to acknowledge that MCC did recently increase service in Oakhurst from 3 to 5 runs to better meet the demand. And they will add more service as ridership grows. That said, starting service in Madera early enough to get people from Oakhurst back to Madera by 8 a.m. would mean they would need to start service in Madera by 4 a.m. So that's tough to justify unless there's really a strong ridership to support that. And so right now, with one comment requesting that, the SSTAC didn't think that this request rose to the level of being an unmet transit need. If you'll bear with me just a second, it says my laptop rose. Okay. Provide local service in Oakhurst on Sunday to go to church services. And so again, we've mentioned microtransit before. They're thinking that microtransit could be a flexible and cost-effective way to boost service in Oakhurst. And MCC is actively looking into funding to make that happen. So at a bus stop at the New River Grove apartment complex in Oakhurst. This comment didn't rise to the level of being an unmet transit need because there is an existing stop within 1/4 mile of the apartments at the park and ride. We had a comment about needing an app to track the buses in real time and get bus updates. This comment also did not rise to the level of being an unmet transit need because riders can use mcctransit.com to track the buses in real time and also get access to a Swift link that will give that information for the county system. Okay, for the city of Madera, here's a few comments that were considered as potential unmet transit needs by the SSTAC. There is a comment to increase the frequency of buses and expand hours of operation to include Sunday service. So currently, Sunday dial-a-ride service is already available. And while there have been a few past comments about adding more service, recent requests have been minimal. So the city recently completed a transit services assessment in July 2023, and recent route changes have been based on that. They are open to future service expansion, but they want to make sure that any changes are financially sustainable. Since right now there was only one commenter this time that was requesting the service expansion, the SSTAC didn't recommend that this was an unmet transit need at this time. And for the city system, there's the same comment about a need to track the buses in real time and get bus updates. And so the city of Madera is working on a contract for a microtransit feasibility study. Included in that study, they're going to be exploring some tech platforms and the integration of those platforms. So this need is already in the process of being addressed. And for the city of Chowchilla, there were no comments that were identified as potential unmet transit needs for fiscal year 2025-2026. So the rest of the comments were determined to be operational issues like the timeliness of the bus or maybe driver behavior. Other comments were about road conditions, repair, lack of sidewalks, broader unmet transit needs process comment, which were addressed by MCTC or they were forwarded to the appropriate agency that handles the maintenance of projects. So then the next step, the immediate next step for this board is to make the final decision on unmet transit needs by resolution. After that, we'll finalize that unmet transit needs report, which will be included in the July policy board agenda. All of the required documentation will be sent to the state. And then the transit agencies will begin to make progress on anything that was recommended by the SSTSC and approved by the board. So in this case, then MCC will do more surveying of the riders of the Easton, Arcola, Ripperdan, Lavinia route to determine what changes should be made there. And so with that, I'll try to answer any questions that you might have. We also have in attendance the transit managers from each transit agency to help answer questions, as well as our SSTAC chair, Frank Simonis.
Thank you, Natalia. Very detailed presentation with the unmet transit needs report there. We have any questions from our commission?
I do. So in regards to like the microtransit, and is there grants or any kind of funding or pilot programs, for instance, for like Lavinia, where you're saying it's costing so much to hit such a higher ridership to even make it feasible? Is there anything in place that they could have a test program for the microtransits, or is it we still have to kind of wait, kind of get there before we can do anything?
Well, I can try to answer that question, and then also the county's transit manager is here, Monty Cox. To start, yes, there are funding available. We can, the county could look into that. We can assist with that. Also with the fare box thresholds or requirements, if you are doing a pilot study, they will kind of waive those requirements for a little while. I think it's like 1 or 2 years so that you could test your pilot out. But then after that, you kind of either have to, hopefully that service is taking off and doing as well as you expected. But if not, then TDA wants to see the fare box recovery to come back up to the minimum thresholds that they require. And so, yeah, there are different funding sources that could be available to help fund it. And that's what the county's looking into. But
I can add that we are searching for discretionary grants that we can go after to implement a pilot project. But those discretionary grants are highly competitive, and Madera County struggles to compete just because of our size sometimes, but we will continue to go after those and try and see what we can. I feel confident we'll eventually get one, but it takes a couple tries before you're successful here.
I mean, I guess the question would be, so I mean, with knowing how much it costs, for instance, to do a Lavina trip, isn't another way to look at what the cost of a micro transit trip would be to see if it's comparable, or is there cost savings, or
we actually did a micro transit study already, and so we know that the cost of a micro transit trip is very similar to what we're currently providing in demand response type services in other areas, and it's cost per passenger is pretty high. But it doesn't mean we won't do it. Just means that it makes more sense to provide it as a demand response type service rather than a fixed route service. And so that's why microtransit is the only possible feasible way to try it. And so once we can find the funds to implement the pilot project for microtransit, then we'll be able to get more data and see how it works.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I have a question, because you get 10 comments. You're so diligent with every single comment, You get 10 comments from Lavina, which is 6 times higher than their daily ridership per route. So are these comments coming from people who actually live there, or from groups that represent places like Lavina?
I would say a little of both, just to answer that question. So I think when we're at the workshops, a lot of the people say that they live right there in that area. There are a few people that are mainly like from an advocacy group, or they live nearby, or they're friends of people who actually live there in Lavinia. And so I would say about 80% of the people at the workshops that were giving these comments do live there. We do pay attention to the fact that maybe they've requested this even last year. So even if we see one comment, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have very much weight. We do take into consideration that perhaps this is a reoccurring thing. We might even look at, how a route is performing if someone wants more service and say, well, how is it doing now? So we'll look at that. Some of our SSTAC members are social service providers. So they meet with people on a regular basis and they provide their input if they've been hearing the same thing. And so it kind of goes together to kind of give input into their decision or their recommendation. So yeah, there were about 10 people at that last workshop in Lavinia. Most of them did live there. A few of them were from advocacy groups or friends. And some of them were the same commenters from last year. They're very diligent in what they're requesting because it matters to them. And so, yeah, we do try to make sure that we give each comment the due diligence.
And at what point do we look at route reconfiguration, efficiencies, those types of things?
We are always looking at opportunities to do something better, which is why we are now focused on providing a demand response service in that area rather than a fixed route. Because even, there's not a lot of ways to redesign their fixed route because the residential area is very sporadic. If you're talking specifically about Lavina, then you know that the residential community is very spread out, right? There's a little, some housing here, a little bit of housing way over here, and it's just really difficult to serve all those little areas with a fixed route, which is what we're doing now.
Yeah, so I think, and what precipitated my question was specifically along the 41, where there's a gap between 145 and Avenue 12. That if that has been looked at, or if it has been looked at, what is the reason why there is no southbound travel or south northbound travel on 41 between 145 and Avenue 12?
That, to be honest with you, I've only been here, 2 or 3 years. And in that time, I think it has never been looked at and it has grown a lot in that period of time. So it's probably due to be looked at, but we have not actually done any studies to determine whether a route that goes directly up 41 would be more productive than the way we serve it now, which is, I think, what your question really is, right?
Or when is an appropriate time to look at those?
Yes, I mean, it would be appropriate to look at that now.
Sure.
Anyone else? Olivia, are you getting comments? Questions? Natalia, thank you. Going back to Lavina, the dial-a-ride exists now, correct? For Lavina, is there a dial-a-ride on demand if someone calls?
There is not currently
So-
a dial-a-ride that serves Lavina right
They
now.
have that fixed, but it's just a one route, one time a day.
It's actually 3 days a week, twice a day.
Thank you. And my understanding is that, reading one of the comments that they had is that, aside from being afraid that they'll be left here, is that, that's why they're not taking on that, fixed route, because it's 3 times a week, doesn't give them time to do certain things, they're stuck. So I understand, but, exploring the other on-demand, similar type of like a dial-a-ride, would that not work out there by any chance? Is that not something?
That is my suggestion since I've been here, to look at doing something like that. Better, but it takes some time to develop it up, and that's why we want to do surveys to determine what time frame they really want it, so that we, implement something that is effective and successful rather than just guessing.
Yeah, and I guess looking at the numbers, 1.7 riders, I mean, it really just highlights the data that says that, well, you don't really have the riders. But to Commissioner Sakaraya's point is that if we were to take the fare box out of the way, one of those elements that determines whether it's an unmet need or not, by providing somewhat of a pilot, I'm not sure if this would be the case there, we could see if there's any increase in ridership. And then we can dismiss if in fact it was that fee or not. Because now you have something that's more on demand and really to suit their needs out there. All right, well, with that, thank you again, Natalia. If there's no further questions, I will open it up to the public. Any public wishing to make a comment on this? Do we have anyone on Zoom?
We don't have comments.
Comments, okay. So there is an action item on this. I'll bring it back to the board. My commission, I'm sorry.
I'll move for approval.
Okay.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Waitress and a second from Commissioner Wellmoff. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Item 5E, recommendation to shift the unmet transit needs process from spring to fall. I'm assuming this is also you, Natalia?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. You know, at MCTC, we're always looking at our processes, trying to evaluate and make sure and see if things can be improved or maybe be done more efficiently. And so that's why we're recommending a shift in the unmet transit needs process from spring to fall, starting with the upcoming fiscal year 2026-2027 cycle. And right now, obviously, we run this process in the spring. That's what we just got through talking about. But moving into the fall makes more sense for a few key reasons. One, we found that it could allow for better budget alignment. We know that the transit agencies start budget planning in January. So if we were to wrap up the UTM process in the fall, they could actually use the public input to inform their budgets. The second reason is that here in this county, we seem to have a lot of community events in the fall. And so we tend to attend those events as well. So these events are great chances to meet people where they are and hear about their transit needs. So the fall seems a good time for that. It's also still totally compliant with the Transportation Development Act guidelines. The TDA doesn't lock us into a specific schedule as long as we meet the final deadline. So a fall timeline keeps us fully in the clear for that. So we're proposing a timeline where we would kick things off in September, kind of like how we did before. We kicked things off in February. This time we'd be kicking things off in September. October would be the public hearing. In December would be when the SSTAC would make their recommendations. And then in January, it will be mirroring what this meeting was like, where this board would adopt the findings. And then by March, we would send it all to Caltrans. And so overall, we believe that this change would help us align better with the transit agency's budget cycles. We could leverage existing community events, all while staying compliant with the TDA requirements. And so we wanted to bring that to your attention just to let you know about it and to see if you had any comments or questions.
All right. Thank you, Natalia. Do we have any comments or questions with us moving this to the fall? All right. So with that, I'll open it up for, this is only information, so I'm not sure if there's any public comment on this. If not, then
Oh, we have a.
we do. Okay.
Hi, it's Frank Simonis, the SS Tech Chair. I just want to say I wholeheartedly support this, that this would be a lot easier. I've helped work on these for 4 years in a row. And Natalia's suggestion that we move this process to the fall for us is something I think is a wonderful idea. And I just want to let you know that I support this myself.
Well, thank you again, Frank. Appreciate your comments. If there's no other comments, then this is a information and discussion item. Thank you again, Natalia.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 6, MCTC sitting as the Madera County Transportation Commission to reaffirm all actions taken while sitting as a transportation policy committee. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Right. We have a motion from Commissioner Poitras, second from Commissioner Wellhoff. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, item carries. Moving on to item 7, administrative consent items. We have several, so I'll ask if any of the audience may have a comment, question regarding the consent. If not, then I'll bring it back for a motion.
Move for approval. Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Poitras, second from Commissioner Wama. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Moving on to item eight, administrative action discussion items. Item 8A, Executive Director Employment Agreement, 2019-04, Resolution 2506. Is this something you want to take on? You want me to read this?
Yeah, you just need to read the statement.
All right. So the item before us is MCTC Board Policy conducted a closed session in its April 23rd, 2025 meeting. The closed session item was as follows. Item A, Public Employee Performance Evaluation. Item B, Conference with Labor Negotiators. The amendment to the Executive Director Contract 2019-4 reflects the following by Resolution 25-06. Effective immediately July 1st, 2025, the proposed amendment provides for a salary adjustment of 10%, a minimum annual salary adjustment of 5% for the years 26 and 27, subject to satisfactory employee performance. And the term of the agreement shall be extended through December 31st, 2028. All other benefits will remain the same, consistent with the current agreement as amended. Again, that is something that I had to read. With that, I'll bring it back for any questions or comments from my board. Okay. I will have a comment on my own. I did have a reservation on one of the items regarding the satisfactory evaluation of the 5% increase. Previously, I think that was at a 1% with this board's discretion. I am in full favor of the 10% increase that was proposed. That's not a problem. I think our executive director has done a fabulous job. But I do have a reservation with that section of the employment agreement. And with that, that's my comment. Not sure if anyone has anything else to add. Comments? Okay, with that, I'll bring it to the public. Any questions, comments from the public?
None online.
Okay, I'll bring this back.
Move for approval. Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Poitras, second from Commissioner Wama. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, aye. Motion will carry. If you want to take roll, that's fine. If not, then we do have 5 yes and 1 no, and that no is your Chair Rodriguez. Okay, moving forward, we do have item Item 9, MCTC sitting as the Madera County 2006 Transportation Authority. Item 9, Authority Administrative Consent Items. Again, I'll ask if there's any member of this body wishing to pull it for separate discussion. If not, I'll open it up to public. Okay, seeing none, bring it back. We have a motion to approve the administrative consent items.
So move.
Okay,
Second.
okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Poitras, second from Commissioner Wemhoff. Seems like that is the duel today. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, okay, motion carries. Item 10, authority action discussion items, there's none. We'll move on to other items. Miscellaneous. Item 11A, items from staff.
Yes, I just wanted to share with you the State Route 99 Coalition to finish 99 did go on an advocacy trip to Sacramento. And I just wanted to share with you the brochure that we provided to those that we met with. It's an impressive brochure. It talks about our asks and it talks about both, all three counties and what our needs are. And of course, the day that it's printed, it would be outdated the next day because, the numbers do change. But I wanted to share it with you. It will be updated frequently. And when we go to Sacramento, this is what we do provide to them. And so I'll share that with you. And just a reminder that we do not anticipate having a meeting in June, so there will not be a MCTC meeting in June.
Yay.
Is that the way a commission, the chairman's supposed to be? I thought it would be like, it's kind of like, oh darn.
He doesn't like the way the leaves are around.
They go too fast. Yay. Actually, June's a good day. Kids are out of school. Maybe it's time to go to vacation. That's probably-
Right. And that's all I have.
Right. So, thank you, Executive Director. Moving on to item 11B, items from Caltrans.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Shane Gunn from Caltrans. Here's my report. I have two staffing updates. Caleb Brock, who was the office chief out of my office, has left on a temporary acting position. He is now up in District 10 as the acting deputy district director for planning. I'm currently advertising to backfill his position. That will be it for a period of up to 1 year. Most of you probably already know, but it's worth noting, Director Tavares, Caltrans director, has left Caltrans. He has been temporarily replaced by our chief deputy director, Mike Kiever. It is unknown when Mr. Kiever will be replaced and a more permanent director will be assigned. Moving on to a Clean California active project, Chowchilla State Route 233 Enhancement Project. Anticipated completion is this summer. So looking forward to that. Some notice of funding opportunities and discretionary grant programs. The 25-26 Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant, we're expecting awards this summer, hopefully next month. California Senate Bill 1 program awards, staff recommendations for SB 1 discretionary programs, which is the TSEP and LPP, are expected to be announced later this month or early next month, with adoption by the CTC scheduled for the June meeting. We do have a couple of current funding opportunities. US DOT's Build America Bureau recently issued a notice of funding opportunities for up to $20 million in no match grants for the Regional Infrastructure Accelerators Program. So what this program does is it funds technical resources, planning, and project development to expedite regional transportation infrastructure through innovative financing and delivery methods, including public-private partnerships. Applications for that grant are due June 16th. Caltrans is able to provide a letter of support. If you're interested in one, you can contact my office or Braden Duran if you have his contact information. A reminder that should have been brought up at the last board meeting, the Safe Streets and Roads for All notice of funding opportunity. I want to remind you that the deadline for that is June 26th. Once again, we're able to issue letters of support for that. Update on the South Madera 6-lane project. Currently in plan specifications and estimate, or PS&E, in right-of-way phase. We're expecting completion of PS&E in October of this year. We are currently working with property owners to determine property requirements. Construction is still scheduled to begin summer of next year. Caltrans has been working with the County of Madera on the ZEV charging stations as part of our greenhouse gas mitigation. Currently, the team is identifying the most viable location. North Madera 6-lane. The environmental phase is now underway. PANED is targeting April of 2028, with RTL hopefully in November of 2030. And Caltrans will be hosting a virtual and in-person public scoping meeting in August of this year. We'll keep you posted on the status of that. The Downtown Madera Cap M project, and Cap M is kind of a misnomer because it's got a bunch of roundabouts and road diets in it. That one is moving along great. We do have our maintenance consent letter from the railroad. There was a concern about PG&E relocations delaying the project. Those PG&E relocations are no longer needed. The team has found a way to work around the 3 existing vaults. RTL is targeted for next month. Begin construction will be January of 2026. The 99-233 interchange improvement project, design submitted the final parcels to surveys last week. The design standards decision document, or DSDD, has been approved. The supplemental project report has been submitted for e-review. I think that was just fairly recently. The draft freeway agreement will be submitted to headquarters as soon as the supplemental project report actually has been approved. And the 60% constructability review meeting is going to be next month as well. Cottonwood Creek Bridge replacement. Construction is still on schedule to be completed next month, obviously depending on any weather or other potential delays. Madera South Expressway. Consultant is addressing 95% constructability comments and is preparing the 100% package. Right-of-way and utilities are progressing, and the team is finalizing the drainage for the entire project. Design is scheduled to be complete in June with an advertisement in September of this year. Construction should be beginning in December, and it will go through June of 2027. Rancho's rehab, obviously it's open for the public, and we're working on just a few punch list items to close that contract out. And the last one I have is the Chowchilla CAPM project. The 60% constructability review was held on April 1st. The design is currently working on the plans to submit the PS&E package to our district office engineer in the fall of this year. And RTL is still targeting spring of 2026. That is the end of my updates. Do I have any questions from the board?
Any questions or comments? Can't wait for that day, but I see Supervisor Poitras moving around to that roundabout on that fire engine.
That's going to be just wonderful.
I like it when we've got 3 roundabouts back to back. I always picture getting a go-kart.
You know, hopefully they'll be handing out cannabis samples.
That may be the case. All right, so any other comments, questions? All right, we'll bring it on to items from commissioners.
Comment.
All right, I will say that I did have an opportunity last month to be appointed to the San Joaquin Air Quality Pollution Control District, and I know that I owe that a lot to some of my colleagues here. Thank you again, Supervisor Poitras, and your support, Director Taylor. Appreciate that. I hope that I can serve in a capacity that certainly looks out for our county, more importantly for the quality of air in our communities. So that being said, that's all I have. Is there anything else that we have? If not, then I'll get a motion to adjourn. Great. Move on second.